Right now, global trade is navigating some incredibly dark waters. Between escalating trade wars, the fallout from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and increasingly fractured supply chains, most nations are pulling back and playing it safe. But India is doing the exact opposite. Under the direction of Union Minister Piyush Goyal, the country is leaning into this turbulence. They are looking at global disorder not as a reason to retreat, but as a massive structural opening to expand. This data shows exactly how that strategy is playing out. Despite all those global headwinds, India's combined goods and services exports hit a record high in the 2025-2026 fiscal year, surging to $863 billion, largely carried by a boom in digital services. Weathering a global economic contraction is difficult enough, but for India's broader geopolitical ambitions, merely surviving the storm is not the end goal. This chart visualizes the government's massive target for the next fiscal year, crossing the $1 trillion mark. That leaves a steep $137 billion gap between where they are and where they want to be. Bridging that void is a serious mathematical problem. To get from $863 billion to $1 trillion in a single year requires an aggressive export growth rate of 16 to 17%. When you compare that against the sluggish, single-digit growth averages we see across most other major global economies right now, a 17% jump is audacious. In a market where global demand is weakening, growth of this scale will require an immediate and significant shift in the speed at which the domestic industry can produce and ship high-value goods. This strategy rests on a specific premise from Minister Goyal, treating crisis as opportunity. As corporate China Plus One strategies redirect global manufacturing away from single points of failure, India wants to be the obvious alternative. Here we see the blueprint for how they plan to capture that redirected capital. The government is tearing down decades of bureaucracy, starting with the Jan Vishwas Bill, decriminalizing over 1,000 minor offenses that paralyzed startups. They also wiped out 42,000 compliance burdens and activated 4 free trade agreements to give exporters preferential access to international markets. On the ground, logistics are catching up. The national GST framework eliminated state tax bottlenecks that delayed cross-country shipments, and new single-window industrial parks are drastically reducing the time it takes for foreign companies to invest and set up shop. By dismantling the regulatory barriers that historically paralyzed foreign capital, the government is treating these targets as a direct result of tangible policy reform. While manufacturing gets the headlines, it's the digital services sector actually doing the heavy lifting to close that massive export gap. Looking at Global Capability Centers, or GCCs, India now hosts over 1,800 innovation hubs, employing 2 million professionals. These centers generated nearly $65 billion in 2024, and the sector is projected to break the $100 billion mark by 2030. But the quality of the work is what stands out. 13 Fortune 500 companies are now generating 25% of their total global patents directly from their India-based GCCs, with over half of these centers heavily investing in agentic AI. This shift into high-value, patent-generating intellectual property marks the moment India's competitive advantage moved beyond labor costs and into specialized expertise. The physical merchandise sector is now attempting to mirror that exact tech evolution. The strategy is to aggressively shift from exporting cheap raw materials to shipping finished, branded products, like complex electronics and automobiles, capturing much more value on every unit that leaves the port. All of this, the digital boom, the manufacturing shift, the $1 trillion target, feeds directly into a much larger domestic agenda, known as Viksit Bharat 2047, the plan to build a fully developed Indian economy by the country's centenary. The $137 billion gap represents the mandatory economic baseline required to fund the infrastructure and social programs central to that 2047 transformation. Which brings us to Minister Goyal's core challenge to the business world. Stop waiting for favorable, stable conditions to arrive. Disorder is a permanent fixture. While other nations hesitated, India has spent the last few years quietly building the digital infrastructure, amassing the specialized talent, and rewriting the regulatory rules, so they are fully prepared when the door of opportunity finally opens. Curious, If the Indian workforce is already commanding 25% of Fortune 500 patents while sitting at $863 billion in exports, what happens to the balance of global tech dominance when they actually hit that $1 trillion mark? For global investors, the risk of entering the Indian market is now being outweighed by the risk of being absent when these structural shifts become the new global standard.